Welcome back to the Bazaar. I'm rather Incoherent, and this isn't quite the Bazaar. The Bazaar, as is so often the case during the closed beta, is offline right now. The servers have died. This is how Bazaar.gg, in my opinion, the most useful and feature-complete database available for the game. Today, I'm going to go ahead and go through all the monsters in the game, cataloged here. One, to create a snapshot in video form of what the monsters were like very early on in the closed beta, but two, to give my quick opinions on all the monsters, what might want to be changed, why you might want to fight them, which ones are good fights, which ones are bad fights, in case people want to hear that sort of thing from the perspective of a relatively high-level player, as opposed to just the raw information that doesn't have any analysis associated with it presented on this website. Before I get into that, though, I do want to reiterate, if you're playing this game and trying to get better, bookmark howbazaar.gg, use it, because it's important for decision-making. If you're, say, playing Vanessa, and you see a health, toughness, and shield shop, right? Then you can filter those things as Vanessa. It's day 2, bronze and silver only, and you can see you have 6 items from the 2 shop rolls for an Astrolabe at 1 out of 10. You have a 60% chance of finding Astrolabe. Are you already committed to going Pufferfish? Is Astrolabe one of the best cards in your build? Knowing those odds is important. The only way to know those odds is either to have an encyclopedic knowledge of the game, which no one has, not even close, or to use outside tools like this to help build up that knowledge and to check your gut intuition about how likely odds are. Again, link in the description, wonderful website. Let's start talking about the monsters. And we're going to go through day by day. I want to mention one thing missing before we get into this, which is when you fight a monster in game, when you hover over it, there'll be gold experience rewards shown. That's not currently listed here. It's not a big deal because it's available in game, but I do want to mention that I'm not going to be able to see that from this website, and that it's not always consistent for the same monster. For instance, Rogue Scrapper is a boss monster on day 2, very threatening on day 2, but on day 3, he'll always show up in the middle where the middling difficulty monster goes, because he's sort of fallen off by then. Instead, Scout Trooper and Aetheryte are the 2 options for your rightmost monster. And for anyone who's very new to the game, let's go back to day 2, because day 1's an exception. The way it will always work is you'll have a left monster, a middle monster, and a right monster for each day. The left monster will give the same experience as the middle monster, but a little bit less gold. The rightmost monster will give somewhere between a little bit more and a lot more of both gold and experience, depending on how much harder it is than normal for that day. But as I was saying, day 1 is the exception to that. Day 1, if there was a hard monster, that wouldn't be good for the game. It would just let high rolls fight something that other builds couldn't, and restrict the options on weak builds while rewarding the better builds at a point in time where good builds is entirely RNG. So there is no easy, medium, hard monster on day 1. There are just 6 different monsters. Don't let that fool you though, because Viper is absolutely the day 1 boss. Viper only has 100 health. It's very easy to kill Viper before he kills you, but a lot of day 1 builds have bad damage. If you are a shield build, you will not mitigate the starting 3 poison he deals to you, or the 2 poison he deals every 4 seconds, and he will kill you with poison before he dies to the sandstorm. You have to be healing, or you have to be dealing damage to kill Viper. If you can kill Viper, this Lash Out skill is okay for a poison build, Extract's great for a poison build, Fang is meh, like it fits on an early board, but it's not very good unless you have synergy with it somehow. Toxic Fang is actually really good for the first couple of days, just the 2 poison on 4 seconds, infinite ammo is fairly valuable as an early board filler. And Gland is one of the best hits possible, because more likely than not, whatever you get from your day 1 encounter, you sell for 1 gold. Getting to regen at a point in time when the regen is at its highest value in the entire game is massive. Typically, if you can fight Viper, fighting Viper is pretty good, but it's not always right. Fanged Inglet is also really, really good to fight, and you can beat Fanged Inglet with an empty board. The reason he's really good is because he has these 2 pelts, and these sell for gold. What that means is they sell for bonus gold equal to their rarity, so bronze sells for 1 plus 1, because you get the plus 1 from bronze rarity and the base 1 for a small bronze item. So when you're fighting Fanged Inglet, your odds of getting 2 gold is higher than with any other starting enemy. So if you see a bunch of stuff that's not relevant to your build, and a Fanged Inglet will often be best for you. Next up, we can go to Kyber Drone. The Insect Wing is typically very good, but it's also usually the case that you have to sell your starting items, your monster rewards on day 1 pretty immediately to afford your starting items. Insect Wing is less valuable if you don't already have something you intend to take to the late game, because the cooldown reduction ends up being worthless if you just throw in like a random starting flail, for instance. Langjian is generally a trap, especially a bronze Langjian that you got after your first fight, so this isn't very good either, but being a medium item, it does sell for 2 gold. Generally speaking, I think Kyber Drone is fine to fight. Having a 2 gold option, having the Insect Wing, which does give some value when you sell it, same with Eagle Talisman. I will take him over Banana Ball, Pyro, or Kimono if those have no synergy with what I'm doing, or if I'm up against like Viper in one of those and I can't kill the Viper. Banana Ball is Duct Tape, which is incredible if you can use Duct Tape effectively in your build. Dooley will often fight him because Dooley loves Duct Tape, Blue Nanas, which is 1 gold and 20 max HP, so again, like the pelt, more valuable than just 1 gold. And Medkit, which is very rarely good on day 1, but when it is, it's very, very good. Pyro, you don't fight unless you're a burn build. If you are a burn build, you click Pyro instantly and you are so happy you saw Pyro. Again, Pyro is trivial. Like most of these enemies, he can be killed by the Sandstorm with an empty board. Lighter, if you have a burn skill, does a ton of damage. If you are a burn build, then the cinders will go on whatever item you have instead of the lighter. And lastly, we have the Haunted Kimono. You either get Silk or 2 gold if you sell the Silk, both of which are valuable to a shield build, Scrap, which is going to buff whatever shield you're playing around, or a medium shield scaling skill. If you are a character or a build where you've gone into day 1, you've realized you're playing defensively in day 1, and you see Haunted Kimono, it's very frequently the right fight. But generally speaking, which fight you pick in day 1 is about figuring out what you benefit from. If you're a burn build, you like Pyro. If you are a dually, you like Banana Ball. If you are any sort of shield build, you like Haunted Kimono. Poison likes Viper. And the typically best thing to pick if you don't have anything you care about is Fanged Inglet for the higher chance of hitting more gold to find the items you want. None of these, with the exception of Viper and Kyber Drone, are going to beat you. Viper and Kyber Drone will require you to do something, the rest die to empty boards. Coming into day 2, that's no longer the case. In day 2, Boryer, let's start with Boryer. Boryer will fuck you up. Boryer has 550 health, which is 3 times more than any previous enemy. Boryer's items are also terrible. Shoeblade is an item no one is ever happy to have on their board, nor is Tusked Helm. He has both of these at silver, which is enough for them to deal meaningful damage to you, with 30% crit chance on Shoeblade and multicast on Tusked Helm, being scaled up by Red Piggle A and Red Piggle X. He also has Sharpening Stone and Scrap, which are alright drops, but not particularly good, because even though they're gold, being small, they only sell for 4, and a Red Gumball, which is not even worth gold. As for skills, like, he does have some. You can have a build that benefits from frontal shielding, but the problem is that with Old Sword, Sharpening Stone, Scrap, Piggles, and Gumball, you're probably not getting anything that sells for much, and you're probably getting a bad item because he has no good items. Even for builds that would use Shoeblade and Tusked Helm, that would just be filler temporarily. Boryer doesn't just like have a shitload of health, allowing them scale up with Piggles and just murder you relatively easily for a day 2 enemy. By far the scariest enemy on day 2 and scarier than most day 3 enemies. But also his rewards are just terrible. Don't fight Boryer. Rogue Scrapper, on the other hand, is very hard for day 3. Again, 550 health is a lot. Every 10 seconds he takes 60. Every 7 seconds he heals for 60. He starts with 40 shield essentially from the granola bar, which is going to scale up this barbed wire to deal 20 every 4. And the Rogue Scrapper is moderately scary. There are a lot of builds that cannot handle a Rogue Scrapper on day 2, but if you can, the additional experience and gold you get from going to the right is very valuable. In particular, this is because getting 2 experience in the early game means you level up before your player fight instead of after your player fight, and what that will do is it will give you more space for your player fights. Since Rogue Scrapper is going to be all the way on the right, he gives you that bonus experience, which is half of what you'll need to get your early level up, and that extra board space for your player fights, so when you can kill him, that bonus experience is almost always invaluable. As for his items though, again, they're not super valuable. Rust is a pretty decent starting skill. It's sort of like starting with the Clamra as a skill without board space. As for the rest of it, Medkit and Scrap can be really helpful if you have something scaling off of them, such as a Bushel or a First Aid in. But other than that, you really want to hit the silver things that scale up your items that sell for 4 gold because they're silver mediums. His items aren't particularly good, but the experience is incredible. And I think that might be the idea with Boryer as well. Like, oh, the experience is so valuable on day 2. He doesn't need to have good drops. But unlike Rogue Scrapper, who will almost always drop something worth a good chunk of gold, when gold is at its most valuable because you've had the least income, the least chance to build your income, the least chance to build a stash you can sell, Boryer just gives you fuck all. The fact that Boryer gives you no economy is more detrimental than the experience he will give you. And I'm going to cover Covetous Thief next, going down in difficulty to our middle fights. Covetous Thief is pretty scary. This Grindstone will have this concealed dagger hitting you for over 100 before the Sandstorm kills him. So you either need to have a very durable build or a good enough offense to kill the guy. It's not hard to build a build that will beat Covetous Thief, because the Grindstone and the concealed dagger really aren't that terrifying, but if you have a weak build, you will often find yourself unable to kill Covetous Thief. If you can though, any multicast weapon hugely benefits from Grindstone. The concealed dagger's right economy, safe sells for 3, Shadowed Cloak can help a 1-weapon build early in the game or just sell for 2, and Pickpocket is essentially gain 2 income because there are 2 fights every day. So there's a lot good with killing Covetous Thief if you can manage it. The rest of these fights, while losable, are not particularly hard. Tent City Mare is another middle fight. He has the temporary shelter and the dog. Everything else on his board is just scraps, and he has 2 skills that are just shield and weapon variants of the same thing. When you sell a small item, give +2 damage or shield. Those skills can be pretty powerful build-arounds if you hit them very, very early. But other than that, his loot is basically just Sharpening Stone Scrap sells for 2, Dog sells for 4, and Temporary Shelter sells for 6. And there are absolutely several builds you can have at this point in time where you end up with a Temporary Shelter just as board filler for a brief period of time before you sell it. But it's also just always a huge hit to get 6 gold off of this enemy on day 2. It's such a massive influx of gold if you get an early Temporary Shelter. Coming down to Giant Mosquito, this guy is so weak that I'm pretty sure you might be able to beat him with an empty board. You're basically here for a silver insect wing, but again, this early in the run, it's very rare to be in a spot where you're taking your items to your final board, and the CDR is not likely to be contributing to a super broken thing. And that's not to say that Insect Wing isn't good. It's 2 gold, it makes your board meaningfully better. Insect Wing is absolutely valuable, it's just that I feel a lot better when I pick up an Insect Wing on day 8 than when I do it on day 2. Amber is largely irrelevant to most builds, same with Proboscis, but Rush can be very, very powerful. At the start of each fight, haste a weapon 3 seconds. This was more broken in the past when single big weapon builds dominated the game, like in the Skyscraper meta, and in the future it will likely have a home again. Generally speaking, if you see yourself playing a build where you're likely going to have one huge weapon and no other weapons in your final build, Rush is insane, and you always consider taking this guy just for Rush, but outside of single weapon builds, the value of Rush is pretty minimal. And lastly, we have Coconut Crab. Coconut Crab is something you can take if you have like a starting Silk because it gives you a chance for Crusher Claw. This is an 8-second speed thing. It's going to scale up your shield for a trivial amount, that doesn't matter. The important part is deal damage equal to the highest shield value of items you have. So if you have a singular huge shield item like a starting Silk on Pygmalion, then this can deal a monstrous amount of damage. His other drops are 30 health, no gold, which is actually generally pretty bad. The early fights need to give you gold, as I was talking about with Warrior, so 30 max health is a lot at this point, but you need the gold for your shops if you find yourself hitting skills in your day 1 and 2 fights. It really negatively hurts your economy, and this is essentially a terrible skill. Seashells are fine if you're Vanessa, and terrible if you're anyone else, but hey, they're silver, so they're worth 2 gold, and Hard Shell's actually a pretty solid skill, essentially giving you 20% more health as long as you're not fighting specifically poison. Or getting one shot, I suppose. That covers all the enemies for day 2. The TLDR is if you can fight Rogue Scrapper, it's almost always very good. Warrior is not to be fucked with. Tent City Mayor and Covetous Thief are both completely fine if you cannot take your higher level opponent, whether it's because you actually can't take Rogue Scrapper because there's no reason to fight a Warrior. And for very specific builds, you can find yourself going after Giant Mosquito and Coconut Crab to open up some very powerful things. Coming into day 3, I won't be covering Rogue Scrapper again. He is the same enemy he was last time, but this time he is worth less EXP. I think he's worth the same amount of gold, I don't actually know. But essentially, the main benefit to Rogue Scrapper on day 2 was that you got the bonus experience. On day 3, he's a much worse fight because now gold is expected to be a higher value than the fights you're getting, right? They're higher level enemies with bigger, higher rarity items, but Rogue Scrapper is still doing the same thing it was on day 2, so his inventory is worth less than it was, relatively speaking, and he is literally worth less XP than he is on day 2. So Rogue Scrapper on day 2 still applies to day 3, except worse in every regard by a meaningful amount. However, just like on day 2, where you would often fight Covetous Thief because you couldn't take a Warrior, Scout Trooper and Aetherite are both very scary, so let's get into them. Scout Trooper has been recently buffed. This weak point detector has literally doubled in value since the last time we fought him, or since the last patch, rather. So his scaling is really, really scary. There are a lot of builds where even though you're actually somewhere between middling to strong for day 3, you stand no chance of killing Scout Trooper. If you're a powerful defensive build, you're just going to kill Scout Trooper. His offensive scaling is not as important as the fact that he will run out of bolas and then run out of Uzi, and you will eventually win if you're a strong defensive build. Strong offensive builds that can actually deal 750 health on day 3, which is like 50% more health than a player has, stand a good chance of killing him. There are a ton of builds that do kill Scout Trooper, but Scout Trooper is very scary. It's very easy to underestimate him and die to him. And it's because of the burst from the Uzi, the bolas, the laser pistol, and the grappling hook all getting buffed up by the weak point detector. In some regards, he's a lot like Warrior, except his inventory actually sells for money, unlike Warrior's inventory. It's also worth mentioning that he has the Gunner skill, which can make him more appealing for a lot of Vanessa builds, but other than that, you're really just here, much like with Rogue Scrapper on the previous day, for more gold and more economy than you're getting on the lower ranking options. Eccentric Aetherite is a build where it can absolutely mess you up. This doesn't show the crit chance of their items at the start of the fight. That's another thing that they might want to add to this someday. But he has a 4% crit chance on that force field. And that's really tremendously important because instead of shielding for 30 and hitting for 30, it shields for 60 and either, I don't know if it hits for 60 or hits for 120. It will also have the initial value of other things on it, like the goggles if he has shield from the last time I used stuff. A crit on the force field, especially early, can be really catastrophic to you. It's very hard for a purely defensive build to take on an Aetheryte because you're letting the force field scale up monstrously. And if you're a balanced middling build where you do offense and defense, you have to be really good at the offense and defense parts because this barbed wire will be scaling the entire fight. So even though you're mitigating most of the force field by not letting him build up any shield between force field hits, the barbed wire can just kill you. Typically, Aetheryte will be best dealt with by really strong offensive builds, and for those builds, at the start of each fight, haste 2 items for 3 seconds. That's good for every build, but especially for offensive builds where very often you have to get in before their engine starts, because their engine might start doing crazy shield scaling or freeze their whole board. Rigged is insane for everybody. It's one of the best skills in the game, but it's incredibly valuable, especially for the offensive builds that are trying to kill Aetheryte more often than not on this deck. Aetheryte, again, like Scout Trooper, very easy to underestimate and die to. A lot of me getting better at the game has been me being better at assessing whether or not random collections of items on my board can beat Scout Trooper and Aetheryte accurately. And a really big part of learning the game is making the call about Aetheryte and Scout Trooper, being wrong about it, and then figuring out why you were wrong so you can make the call better next time. Coming down to Frost Street Challenger, these last 3 enemies are basically complete walkovers. Frost Street Challenger, however, has a very important item, and that is bronze weights. In the current meta, there is a specific pig build using vineyard, bees, yo-yos, birds, and weights, so that every time your opponent does anything, you heal from the vineyard twice because of the yo-yo and the bees, and that triggers the weights to scale you up to the moon. To do this, you really, really want diamond weights, and getting bronze weights off of a Frost Street Challenger, whether that's upgrading your bronze weights or just getting you the weights, is very valuable for this build. So you can see as a 1 in 6 of dropping it. So it's really worth noting, in the current meta at least, that this weight drop is fairly substantial. The rest of his stuff, it sells for gold. Very few builds are built around any of this, although the Icicle can easily fit on a lot of boards, especially on more aggressive builds on this point in time. Dabbling Apprentice is very rarely something I want to fight. It's something I'll accept because Vial of Blood is actually making him a lot better than the left fight would be. When you fight a Dabbling Apprentice, you have a shot at getting Vial of Blood and actually getting as much experience as an Aetheryte or a Scout Trooper because of the bonus EXP for Vial of Blood. But you'll be way behind on gold from the minimal gold value plus selling this for 1. There are some builds, although very rare do you see a port build this early, where Fire Potion and Bottled Lightning are very good. Tanzanian Dagger is just selling for gold, it's not particularly valuable. And unfortunately, Panic is a completely wasted skill where you would pretty much always rather get something that sells for gold, because if you need to fall under half health to reload your items, that's a very terrible method of reloading them. And lastly, we have Tempest Flame Dancer, 350 health, and a bunch of Fiery Cutlasses that are going to sell for 4, so that's good, and he has bars of gold. I believe that these sell for 2, but I don't actually know if they're using the same, because I don't know the mechanics for bars of gold, and sells for gold isn't like a clear description. This is the exact text that you would have on a pelt, so I believe that sells for 2, but I don't know. And of course we have Cinder, Sharpening Stone, and a skill that is, even on burn builds, pretty shit. So Tempest Flame Dancer is pretty much always the worst possible case scenario for day 3. The Fiery Cutlass is at least a hit for 4 gold, which is valuable, but the rest of this is just terrible for pretty much every build. Like, if you're taking Cinders at bronze on your day 3 fight, that's so bad for the economy. You're still not happy, even in a burn build, when you get Cinders off of Flame Dancer. Coming to day 4, I'm getting distressed at how much my mind has committed a lot of this to memory, because there are 8, and I was like, oh no, it's not the same number. Which ones are the hard ones? Which ones are the easy ones? There are 3 medium, 3 hard, and 2 easy. And unlike the last ones, we're starting on the easiest one, Boiler Room Brawler. This is actually easier than almost every day 3 fight. This dude has 500 health and a bunch of weapons and items that do almost nothing. But they do a lot when you get them, specifically the hammer and the wrench. If you have any tools of value, the wrench at the start of each day upgrades a tool. That can include the wrench, so it'll take a while to get your tools upgraded, but a ton of free upgrades on your board over the course of a game is invaluable. The hammer, however, is beyond cracked. When you level up, if you have at least 3 tools, upgrade the item to the left of this. That's very easy to manage. The only time it will be awkward is if you're leveling up on player fight specifically, but you're usually not, right? You can manipulate where your experience falls with experience events to make sure you're not leveling up on the player fights, but you also just, at worst, have a 1 in 6 chance of leveling up on player fights. So 5-6 of the time, with no manipulation, you can just put hammer on your board next to the thing you want to upgrade when you need to upgrade it. Hammer is incredible because it's very easy to push experience and level up like 1.5 times a day. So over 2 days, you get 3 upgrades to whatever you want for free. And typically speaking, if you have a hammer, your run has a tremendously higher chance of going 10 wins than if you don't have a hammer. The value of this card is insane, to the point that basically, if you see Boiler Room Brawler, no matter what's going on, you pick Boiler Room Brawler. That's been my gameplay experience. The rest of his drops aren't huge. There are builds that like an energy potion, there are builds that like a multi-tool. Toolbox at least sells for 2 because it's big. Sharpening Song and Eagle Talisman are easily the worst hits. Flashy Mechanic, I believe it used to be bugged. I don't know if it currently works. And Time to Tinker when you haste Shield 10 can have some very strong synergy, specifically for Dooley with Armadillo right now. But yeah, we're here for the hammer, and the hammer is so important that I very oftentimes click on Boiler Room Brawler and I'm like, oh shit, I didn't even look at the other fights. I really should have thought about that more. Because that's just how strong hammer can be. Going to our other easy fight, the Outlands Dervish at least has the decency of dropping silver, medium-sized cooldown reduction items. So like, yeah, CDR 2% for all your items is not a huge amount, but 4 gold is actually still pretty substantial for day 4. The shoe blades aren't very good. The bars of gold are not very good. They're just like minimal gold item value at this point. And Keen Eye, if you're a crit build, is fine, but otherwise pretty terrible. You're never really that happy to fight an Outlands Dervish, but thanks to the Clockwork Blades, you're never that upset to do it either. You will actually be forced to fight Outlands Dervish moderately often because of how dangerous all the other fights can be. Moving on to medium fights, we have Flame Juggler, and this guy has all of your items have +1 burn, and the first time your opponent's ball is below half health, burn 10. So he has start a fight, burn 40, burn 3 every 3 seconds, and then if you fall under half health, which is very likely, burn another 10. So a lot of people just get lit on fire and die against Flame Juggler immediately. If you have good shielding or just an incredibly durable build, he just can't kill you and you automatically win. But if you look at his board, you'll notice he has a bunch of items that sells for 2, a bunch of items that sell for 1, very minimal synergy even with other burn builds because most of this won't make it onto your board other than perhaps the Silver Lighter and the Cinders. It's just actually like a pretty awful pool, just like Warrior, where even when you can beat him, that typically indicates you're very strong and you can consider fighting any other enemy. You'd usually rather fight the Dervish or the Boiler Room Brawler because they will end up giving you more gold just because of how low the gold value is on this guy. And then there's just nothing he drops that's good, even in burn builds, unfortunately. Moving over to Blood Reef Raider, quick check, how up to date is this? It is up to date. The Crow's Nest is not at gold anymore. That's good to say. If you're playing specifically Crit Vanessa and you don't have a Crow's Nest, you will click this guy without even looking at the other options a lot of the time, because hitting that Crow's Nest could be build defining and put your game on course to win. The Powder Flask and the Cannonball are often very good for Vanessa as well, working well with her ammo synergies. I personally find myself really down on Revolver, but a lot of people disagree with me, and he does have a Silver Revolver, whether that's getting you your first or upgrading to gold, that can be valuable. Shield Potion and Bar of Gold are the obvious misses, and he has a bunch of weapon skills and the ammo stash, all of which are relevant skills for Vanessa's. Essentially, you want to fight the pirate guy if you're a pirate. If you're Vanessa, you're doing the pirate build. That is visually consistent across all the enemies at the current point in the game, and I really like that. That if it is a flame guy, it's good for flame builds. If it is a pirate guy, it is good for the pirate builds. I've been very happy with the visual clarity of what enemies drop so far, where you dig into the mechanics and you find out that actually if you are playing a pirate ammo build, the pirate with the gun is a good thing to fight. That's wonderful. Retiree is, if you're playing a bushel build and you don't have a bushel, he has a bushel. Other than that, though, I tend to find that he's going to scale up moderately well and be fairly threatening with his golf club. And if you don't specifically need bushel or golf club, his drops are pretty weak. He does have, exclusively silver plus items and some medium items, so his gold rewards aren't terrible. But extreme comfort is like a weak form of scaling. Bushel and golf clubs are needed by very few builds that don't already have them. So very rarely do I find it's the right choice to go after Retiree. Although sometimes he will be better in my opinion than Outlands Dervish, and I can't beat level 3, so I will still end up fighting him. Very rarely do I fight Hydro Dude, because 1400 health is a huge jump. He has the twin skills, Slow to Targets and Slow and Steady, which together, when you slow, your items gain 2% crit chance and your weapons gain 3 damage. He also has the Electric Eels, where whenever your opponent uses a non-weapon item, it gets slowed for 1 second. And Elusive, Surrounded by Friends, well, it used to be, the Piranha got nerfed, so it's only surrounded by 2, but it will still slow 2 items for 2 seconds, meaning he has a lot of damage scaling if you are not a high weapon build. However, as long as he's not hitting you, the damage scaling is a lot lower, because it's just going to be hitting the Piranha and the Narwhal. If you are a balanced build with quick triggering non-weapon items and good weapons, then it will actually counter the shit out of you, where all of your non-weapon items are scaling him up tremendously, and then your weapons are triggering him. You want very passive, very strong builds, or very offensive, very strong builds. It's almost impossible to have a balanced build that beats Hydro Dude, and then it gets into the Warrior issue, where his drops include a Citrus, and a coconut. And his skills are actually terrible outside of specifically his build at this point in the game when he's stronger than you. So since he's not giving you anything you want to build around, he has multiple dead drops and it's incredibly hard. Very often the play is to not even try to fight Hydro Dude. If no one else offered is giving you anything you need and you can beat Hydro Dude, more experience, more gold, you fight him. However, you would have been much happier to fight a Deadly Crooner or a Technovirus provided you could have beaten them. Coming over to Deadly Crooner, 1000 health is just a ton less than 1400 at this point in the game. It gives him a lot less time to scale up with the Ganjo, and while you typically don't really care about textiles or Ganjo or anything in this build too much, gold medkit, diamond scrap sell for reasonable gold. He has 2 medium items taking up a lot of his stuff, so you're going to get a decent amount of gold from fighting him compared to Hydro Dude, and if you actually benefit from selling the scrap or the medkit, they can be pretty massive for your build. Not because like it's endgame important, but on day 4, getting plus 16 shield is something that's going off, say, every 4 seconds is actually really relevant numbers. And lastly, we have Technovirus. Technovirus is super high variance if you're fighting it, and that's because the virus is able to destroy another small item on both players' boards, and when you destroy an item, this gains 5 poison for the fight. Sometimes that means the viruses just blow each other up and he's a comical joke fight where you can't lose. Other times, he destroys all of his items except for viruses first, and you take an insane amount of poison. Now, if you can kill him, the 2 cryptos means his average gold value is a lot higher than it otherwise would be, and he only has silver items outside of his solar farm, which is large, so his average gold value is really high compared to almost every other fight. And flanking toxins down here, if you're a poison build, could be relevant, but realistically, it just makes his solar farm scale up the viruses. With Technovirus, if you have a build devoid of small items, you'll usually beat him unless you have bad RNG and the viruses die last. If you have a really strong build, you can typically kill virus as long as you aren't reliant on important small items for that build to be strong. And if you're in a situation where you do have either no weakness to small item destruction or just incredible output to the point where you're not scared of the viruses, then you're in a very, very good situation to kill Technovirus and make a lot of gold out of it. It's worth noting that if Virus were in a stronger place right now, this might be a must-fight thing, just like Boiler Room Brawler to get the virus, but that's not currently the situation. I can count on one hand the number of times I've seen an opponent playing Virus. I could actually count it on one stump because it's 0. So yeah, I can't recommend going to him for Virus, but this sick amount of money he drops, that's actually worth fighting for. Which brings us to day 5, the halfway mark. The Flame Juggler actually shows up a second time on day 5 as a middle fight. If I'm remembering this correctly, Herbian Rocket Trooper and Infernal Envoy are both middle fights. However, the day 5 analysis is on day 5 you should be fighting Mod Squad or Gorgon Noble. On day 5, the day 5 hard fights are notably easier than almost every other day, with notably better drops than their previous counterparts. Let's quickly go through the other ones. Preening Duelist has Gunpowder, Pistol Sword at Gold, and Bronze Throwing Knives, as well as various pieces of ammo and crit build as the misses, and All Talk, which is plus 25 damage while you're above half health, which a Glass Cannon burst build will be. If you are specifically crit Vanessa, you click on Preening Duelist. If you are anyone else, this man doesn't exist. Sabretooth has a lot of pelts, which as we've established means his gold value is a lot higher than you would expect, and he has Diamond Fangs. If this guy were later in the game, you might click on him because Diamond Fangs is insane, reducing the cooldown of all small diamond tier items by 30%. The issue is that unless you have found a hammer already, Diamond Fangs is not something where you know that you're going to get your small items to diamond. This might have a very limited value. And again, he has a full board. He has 10 items on board plus 2 skills. It's a 1 in 12 to hit the Diamond Fangs. So while this guy has better gold value than you might expect because of the pelts, he's a walkover. It's very, very hard to lose this guy in his shiny fangs. So Sabretooth is a thing where you can be like, okay, cool, my build's falling apart. I've got nothing, but I can kill Sabretooth. But you don't want to fight Sabretooth. We've covered Flame Juggler already. This is the exact same guy, but he's worth the exact same as the previous day, which is relatively less, but it's not even like the Mod Squad issue, or not Mod Squad, what's it called? The Rogue Scrapper issue, where it drops down a rank from difficult fight to middling fight. This guy just stayed a middle fight for 2 days in a row. Infernal Envoy has some very cool shit for a burn build. If you are a burn build and you're looking to figure out how to get your burn to a relevant number, Restorative Fire Claws are very, very scary. If you are a heal build that has not figured out how you're going to convert healing to damage and actually win a fight, because you know that you're going to lose to poison scaling, you know that they're going to be hyper-scaling builds that outdo you, Sunlight Spear is actually a way out of that. Cinders are pretty rough, unfortunately. Vengeance is good. Left and right most CDR by 5 is fine, and Strength plus 6 is irrelevant. So there are reasons to fight Infernal Envoy, and frankly, if I played more Burn, I would see myself fighting him more. or even more heal. But typically heal builds have very clear ways of winning right now. The way is weights, by the way. You scale to the moon with weights, so Sunlight Sphere wouldn't fit on your board, but it does seem like there is a home for fighting Infernal Envoy. Recurvian Rocket Trooper, I don't know that I've ever felt like I should fight this guy. I've fought him to see what he does before. He has flashy reload. That's the reason to fight this guy. If you're playing Crit Vanessa, you might click Preening Duelist, or you might click Recurvian Rocket Trooper specifically for your chance at flashy reload. The issue is that like the gunpowder is pretty minimal. The rest of this is very, very minor. You click on Recurvian Rocket Trooper just like Preening Duelist because you're playing Crit Vanessa. I just forgotten what he did because I fight him so rarely. However, Mod Squad scales up. Not that much. He has less health than Hydro Dude, and the Bulldozer takes a long time to get to the point where he's going to kill you. His drops include 2 golden cryptos, which is an insane amount of money, a large silver item, so 6 gold, and then a bunch of small silver friends that are only worth 2 gold each. But the average gold value on Mod Squad is just tremendously higher than most other enemies, as well as the fact that him being a rightmost enemy, he's going to give you more gold and experience as a baseline. Beautiful Friendship is like theoretically a method of scaling, but I've never seen any build where this went moderately large. Not even like huge, it's been middling at, not even middling. It's been completely inconsequential. I'm sure I fought people with this and didn't even realize it was doing anything. But Gorgon Noble is an auto click for me. And the reason for that is Petrifying Gaze. The first time you fall below half health each fight, freeze all enemy items for 1 second. What does that do? Well, the bugged infinite combo builds right now with stuff like daggers and repeaters stop when they're killing you because Petrifying Gaze shuts them off. You're probably still going to die, but it gives you the smallest chance of interrupting them. And even in fair fights, where you're dying to anything other than fatigue, freeze your opponent's entire board for 1 second is still an incredibly valuable thing that will come up in any situation where you were losing. She's obviously better for a poison build with initial dose and paralytic poison. However, Toxic Clockwork Blades is CBR, her items do sell for a reasonable amount, and Vial of Blood, as always, is very valuable, but even more so when it's already coming from the highest experience option. She's better when you're poison, but Petrifying Gaze is so good combined with her high sell value that I always click on Gorgon Noble because frankly, she doesn't deal that much poison. She is nowhere near the capacity of Lich, which I think we'll be talking about very soon. Yes, let's just get right into Lich. Lich was terrifying last patch. Last patch, Necronomicon said when any non-weapon item was used, poison 1 and gain 1 regen for the fight. Your items have their cooldowns increased by 1 second. This is not currently listed as the way it is in the patch notes. In the patch notes, it says poison 3 and 3 regen. I don't know if this is accurate to the game or if this is inaccurate to the game. But the important part is, this deals triple the poison damage that it did last patch on a 3,000 health enemy that starts the match by freezing 2 of your items for 5 seconds, which triggers a skill called Chilling Touch, slowing the rest of your items for 3 seconds. They also have the gold version of Petrifying Gaze, so you're gonna have to get through a lot to kill them while you rack up insane poison damage on yourself, because this triggers on his own poison items, or sorry, his own items as well, not just yours. So even in a pure weapon build, by the time this guy goes down, you'll likely have 100 poison, and in anything other than a weapon build, God help you. Lich is terrifying, easily one of the scariest enemies in the game. However, Necronomicon sells for 50 gold. Gold icicles are great board filler if you still have room for that. The wand is largely irrelevant. I know the wand and the soul ring have crazy promises about opening broken builds, and you can have uses for cauldron and ectoplasm in builds that benefit from burn, poison, etc. But for the vast majority of builds, you're just selling what you get off Lich unless the icicle goes on your board. And Petrifying Gaze and Chilling Touch are both just insane skills. If you can kill Lich, you go to Lich every time. The potential of hitting Necronomicon to just solve your economy is wild. The almost guarantee of hitting a gold item for a lot of money other than Emerald. These insane high roll skills. If you can kill a Lich, you go for Lich. You probably can't kill a Lich. Enclave Weeper and Lone Shark over here at 1650 and 1700 health are at the same far right location as Lich, but they are worth nowhere near as much gold and experience. Infernal is notably easier than Lich for many builds, but he's also impossible for many other builds. This is because he's going to scale his fire damage, or his burn rather, tremendously, and that's because his Fire Claw has burn equal to the burn of your other items, and then every time he attacks with Infernal Greatsword, this is going to gain plus damage for the fight equal to your enemy's burn, and its burn is equal to its damage. So exponential scaling, right? If you can kill Infernal, it's because you looked at him and you said, I can deal 2,000 damage in like 10 seconds. Because once the Fire Claw goes off the second time at second 12, you probably have at most seconds to live, assuming your build's even strong enough to have lived that long. Now, in terms of drop quality, this guy's actually a lot worse than you might expect. The Ruby, 2 Magma Cores, and 3 skills that do nothing for non-burn builds, well, minimum for non-burn builds, that really hurts the average value. A lot of the time I've killed Inferno, but like, oh man, why'd I even come here? But he can also drop 50 gold, he can drop 8 gold with a massive upside for burn builds. Typically, burn builds can't even use the Infernal Greatsword well. You'd much rather scale burn in other ways and have 50 gold. Fireclaw is still good for all the reasons it was good a few days ago, though this guy's less likely to drop it. And when you're playing a burn build, unfortunately, like, these skills aren't even that good for a burn build. But he does have, on average, very high gold value. The issue is that it's got very extreme low rolls with 3 small silver items and 3 skills that won't help you. So even though on average the Infernal Greatsword's pulling up a lot and the Fireclaw and Cinders are definitely above the average value of a day 6 item drop, there are so many complete blanks where you get 2 silver or nothing. It's 6 out of the total 10 possibilities. It's just rough. My final conclusion on Infernal is that if I can beat him, I will fight him for the additional experience and gold, because if you don't low roll, it's insane gold, and even if you low roll, the base gold for an Infernal tends to be miles above a Foreman or a Trash Golem, and you still come out ahead. Coming over to Loan Shark, he's at 1650 health, much more manageable. He has nothing but medium items, so he's either dropping a 4 or 8 gold item or a skill. If you are Vanessa, then using an aquatic item, haste a weapon for 1 second can be crazy. It can also be wholly irrelevant, even for Vanessa. Power Broker is irrelevant to a lot of builds. For some builds, it's pretty good. Usually it's at its best in something like Crook Pig, because of course it is, but it's not really a terrible skill. There are way worse dead skills to pick up, and I'm generally very happy to fight a Loan Shark, expecting to get some good gold out of it. And obviously Silver ATM is the biggest high roll, giving you +2 income in addition to selling the item. Next up, we have the Enclave Weeper at 1700 health. I'm typically never super thrilled to fight this guy. He has a lot of low roll items, silver bandages, copper extract, silver bandages again, copper vial of blood. The vial of blood makes him give a ton of experience total because it's still a rightmost fight. But he has a lot of items that can sell for a decent chunk and a lot of items that sell for nothing. Again, it feels very swingy like Infernal. But the big thing is, like, this skill is irrelevant, and when I look at his items, even in poison builds, there's really nothing I particularly want. His items tend to be very weak, his sell value is not particularly high. However, Enclave Weeper, despite being a poison build, is also a pushover. His total poison value is not that high, and I've felt very rarely like I couldn't beat an Enclave Weeper. The same is true with Loan Shark. I didn't really cover how dangerous he was, because compared to Lich and Infernal, he's just not. They are able to kill you if your build is particularly weak, but generally speaking, you roll right through these guys. Foreman has a much higher gold value than you might expect with 2 large gold items, so his average value goes to the moon. The rest of his drops, however, are pretty weak. There are very few builds that are out here just like ready to do crazy things to get a Chris Army Knife or a Cog. It's not like a Crow's Nest. It's not like a flashy reload. This isn't a fight where you go to it for anything here. It's just a middle fight where you can't kill Lich and it has good gold, so you go here. Trash Golem is, he's a thing. There are builds where Trash Golem is very good, where you have a Weather Glass and you're desperate for a Rainbow Potion. But outside of that, again, Trash Golem falls in the same spot as Foreman, where you see a Lich, you can't kill a Lich. Jury Rigger is insane. I will mention, sometimes you're in a situation where using an ammo item, reload one to the item to the left of it, is just like an insane amount of ammo, where your Vanessa build that wasn't infinite is still finite, but it's such a large amount of finite damage that it doesn't matter. It may as well be infinite until like day 14, 50,000 health Pig gets involved. Jury Rigger can give you so much ammo that it may as well be unlimited ammo. So I will mention that Vanessa has a reason to click on this guy more than anyone else, and that is doubly true with Rainbow Potion being a thing specifically valuable to Weather Glass and Port builds. But as for the rest of this, you're happy that he has some gold items that sell for a lot at medium and large size, but he doesn't have anything particularly important. Dire Mosquito, the things with wings. That's a phrase I heard early in the game, where if you don't know what the fights do, if you click on a guy with wings, he probably has cooldown reduction as a drop. It holds true here with 4 silver wings. This is much better on day 6 than days 1 and 2, because you're going to have more items benefiting from the CDR, and items much more likely to make your final board. The rest of his items are complete trash, and Paralyzing Rush does not hold a candle to the original Rush because, simply put, you slow a lot less than you start the game. There are very few builds that have a tremendous amount of slowing, and also a bunch of weapons that need haste. There are rare builds where Paralyzing Rush can be insane, and if you have that build, it's worth keeping an eye open for this, but it's probably not going to be relevant. Zookeeper. If you are playing Pygmalion and you are all in on Crook, it is day 6, you have not found the Crook. Your Crook is still silver. then here is another chance at crook. I have never gotten the fabled double crook build where you come here with a gold or diamond crook and get the second crook. It's gross overkill and doesn't matter and you shouldn't do it. But the main reason you click on Zookeeper is to find a crook. Maybe you're a Vanessa or a Dooley and you realize that crook can actually provide a lot of scaling to the specific beatdown burst build you have. Maybe you're a pig who's been missing his crook and you're still willing to go into crook starting on day 6, but crook is the main thing you see here and come for. He also has 2 gold pelts and 2 medium silver items, meaning his average gold value is a bit higher than you would otherwise expect, and Toxic Friendship is unfortunately pretty irrelevant. There are a small handful of Dooley builds that could really use this to generate meaningful poison, but by and large, Toxic Friendship is not going to be relevant to pretty much anything. I will also mention this is how you get Dragon Whelp, which is a crazy scaler that burns equal to its damage. It starts with 1 damage, so you have to find a way to scale its damage, like Crook. I don't think I've ever seen Dragon Whelp go hard. He strikes me as worst flamethrower in most builds. But if for some reason you think that you can scale a Dragon Whelp and it's your best bet on day 6, this is how you do it. And lastly, Dire Inglet. He's got pelts, but he's also got a bunch of other small items that don't sell for extra gold. Aggressive is just not very useful. Scaling crit chance is very rarely the way you're going to get crit chance if you need crit chance, and if you don't need crit chance, then scaling crit chance is a very minor form of damage scaling compared to like a bunch of the crazy exponential shit you can see. So for me, Dire Inglet is like you're playing a build, you're weak on day 6, you genuinely don't know if you can survive against Trash Golem or Foreman, there's no way you're beating, say, Lich, and you just have to click Dire Inglet. Unlike everyone else where there's a reason to click on them, Dire Inglet is the, well, my build shit, so I guess I'll fight this one. There are some things here where they have absolutely crazy skills, and the skills are so valuable that you automatically click on these enemies unless they're competing with each other. Joyful Jack has access to Rapid Thaw, which is when your opponent freezes your items, reduce the duration by 1 second. So essentially all their freeze numbers are 1 lower. That's a lie though, right now it's bugged and it just makes freeze stop working after a couple of seconds. Even if it gets fixed, which like I hope it does soon, it will still be an insane skill where you really value it. It also offers, again, another way to scale poison by healing. So if you're playing one of those super high healing builds, then Equivalent Exchange and Rapid Thaw gives you a ton of reason to come here. As for his items, he has a large silver, medium silver, a couple of golds. His average sell value is fine, but not impressive for this day. The big thing is you can come here for his skills. The same is very much true with the Thug. The Thug has Thieves Guild Medallion, which is insane. He has a medium gold item and several medium silvers, a diamond item that's small. His average sell value is ridiculous because there are so many larger items, so many higher ranked items, and the Thieves Guild Medallion, which is worth a fucking fortune or an entire extra fight that will itself reward a lot of gold as well. However, none of that is actually important. Small weaponry and strength, like you can have a weapon skill build that cares about that. It's not likely that this is going to be relevant scaling, but it does contribute to builds when you hit it a lot of the time, if minorly. No, the reason you instantly click this guy is not the Thieves Guild Medallion and the high value, it's Bonk. Bonk increases all of your enemies' cooldowns by 1 second. That is insane. Gold Fort is a Pygmalion card that takes up 3 spaces, and while it does generate a minimal amount of shield, the main reason you run that card at all is because it has the same text. Enemy cooldowns are increased by 1 second. Bonk is absolutely massive and can be game-winning on its own. So anytime I see Joyful Jack or Thug in my middle slot, I'm considering fighting them immediately. They can also have Cosmic Rock spawn here, things with wings. It can offer you the, what's it called? Oh, it's really weird. This isn't the color it is in game. I wonder what happened in this picture. It can offer you Feathers, which are reducing cooldown by 12%. Not for your whole board, just for one item, but honestly, that's even more valuable. And the rest of its items are, they exist. That's the nicest thing I can say about them. The average sell value is pretty low here. You're mostly here for Feather. The skills are not particularly valuable. Crit builds rarely care about haste because crit builds tend to just be explosive combos or already have haste. Your items have plus 9% crit chance can be a relevant source of crit scaling if you don't have it already. The main reason you click on this guy is for Feather or because you cannot beat the fight offered on the right. I'll also briefly discuss Sergeant Suds and Viper Tyrant. They exist. That's my discussion of them. I will show them so that they are shown in the video, but realistically, even on poison builds, the Viper has nothing you care about. On Sergeant Suds, Rivet Gun. Rivet Gun's here, and Rivet Gun's pretty good, right? Rivet Gun is the stealth item where when you use the item to the right, you charge the item to the left of this 1 second. If you have an insanely fast item like the Pulse Rifle at multicast 3 on 3 seconds, like a Zooped Up Atlato at 1 second, then the Rivet Gun is essentially just charge something 1 second every second. And that's great for a small item. The fact it deals damage is mostly beneficial because it allows it to be frozen or slowed in place of your other items. Rivet Gun's very good. It's the thing that Sergeant Suds can drop that you won't, but very few builds are out here taking Sergeant Suds for a 1 in 6 at Rivet Gun when Bonk, Quick Thaw, and the rightmost fights are on the table. Shock Trooper sucks a little bit. Again, the covering of this guy is mostly he's very dangerous because his plasma rifle scales to the moon very quickly. Typically, if the fight goes 16 seconds long, he will kill you at the 16-second mark. You have to have a very strong defensive build to survive this guy. More likely, if you beat him, you're playing a very strong aggressive build instead. I should also mention he has the Tracer Fire skill. This is largely irrelevant to the vast majority of builds, because even in burn builds where you will be scaling this up, typically by the time you have a relevant crit chance, your opponent's either died to your burn already, because your burn is scaling so rapidly, that's what burn does, or your opponent has 10,000 shield and you are never killing with burn, and your new 100% crit chance isn't going to change that. So Shock Trooper is a very scary rightmost enemy. In fact, of the ones you can get, Shock Trooper is far and away the most dangerous one, and also the least rewarding. Chili Charles has a lot of gold items, including gold large items and gold medium items with an enchantment that sell for even more, so this guy has insane value when you kill him. Ice Cubes and Icicle are pretty irrelevant, and when you freeze, your items gain 2% crit chance. Like, if you're triggering this enough for it to matter, then you're already winning by locking down your opponent's board. The big thing here is that Icy Charles being a rightmost fight, or sorry, Chili Charles being the rightmost fight, gives the most experience, the most gold, and has incredible average gold value if you see it. Treasure Turtle is fine. It's just going to tank up, very easy to kill for any offensive build, very easy to outscale for any defensive build. Typically, Treasure Turtle is a free win, and the Genie Lamp is a huge hit, whereas the rest of this, like, the average level is fine with bags of jewels, the gold value is pretty similar, but the drops for this guy aren't very great except for Hunker Down, which, as I talked about with the crab forever ago, it's just a ton of extra health provided you're not matched against poison. Having saved the best for last, we have the Radiant Corsair. He has 3,600 health, but because of Fiery Rebirth, you're going to have to kill him twice. You need to kill 7.2 thousand health of Pirate Parrot before you're allowed to get a chance at Fiery Rebirth, because when you get this, it will also give you a second life bar that cleanses all of your burn and poison. It is one of the best skills in the game. The fact that this is a relatively easy enemy, provided you can deal the damage, means that you almost always go after the Parrot for the 1 in 7 chance at Fiery Rebirth. This is the only time you're ever going to see him on day 7. If you see him in your 1 in 3 runs where you get this guy, you take your 1 in 7 to get a second life bar and a tremendously higher chance of going 10 wins. Flame Dancer's irrelevant. In terms of the rest of his items, they're all gold. 3 of them are medium, so his average gold value is quite high. And the only thing to be aware of is his only real meaningful source of damage is this anchor. If you are a max health build where you survive just by scaling health and you don't have good defenses or offenses outside of that, you probably can't beat Radiant Corsair. If your build is weak, you probably can't beat Radiant Corsair. But if you are any kind of strong build, whether that's insane healing, insane shielding, really good offenses, pretty much every strong build at this point in the game can crush Radiant Corsair for either very good gold, plus the highest gold and experience rewards offered out of any enemy, or a second health bar to massively increase your chance of winning anything. The only things I ever consider clicking over Corsair are Thug and Joyful Jack for their insane skills, but typically I'll be clicking these guys over the other rightmost enemies, and otherwise I'm clicking Radiant Corsair. In the vast majority of my games on day 7, I fight one of these 3 enemies. It's very, very rare for me to be in a situation where I'm choosing between one of these 2, a Cosmic Rock, and one of these 3, where none of these 3 have spawned. Which brings us to day 8, and we're starting to see the weaker enemies get reused more and more. Joyful Jack and Cosmic Rock we've talked about. Joyful Jack still has the same insane skills, and we're still willing to fight him, even though he's the leftmost fight, giving the least gold and less experience. Then we have 2 middle fights and 4 rightmost fights. For the middle fights, we have Infernal Frigate, which is typically not very useful for any build, unfortunately. As burn builds at the start of each fight, burn 17's a little bit of scaling, it's not tremendously relevant. And then for its actual items, there are very few burn builds that are desperate for late game pop snappers, late game thrusters. They've never hit Trebuchet, or they've never hit Rocket Launcher, and duly if Rocket Launcher is even somehow making it into your burn build. Incendiary rounds are just not tremendously impactful. It's very hard for Infernal Frigate to be something you really need. You can be in situations as burn builds where Trebuchet is really good, as burn builds where incendiary rounds have room on your board to go in and it gives you a lot more burn. He's not terrible for a burn build. For everything else, he's god-awful. These multiple silver pop snappers really cripple his average gold value, and there's nothing he can drop that will actually improve your build. Coming to Oasis Guardian, this is another like meandering poison enemy that really doesn't do very much. And again, doesn't have much for you. 8 regen's a pretty irrelevant skill on day 8, and looking at the items available to him, he has a bunch of items that don't really fit into any build cleanly. Silver Sleeping Potion can go into a port build, the rest of this doesn't really have a home anywhere. In terms of average gold value, however, he does have a large and 2 medium gold items with a relatively small drop pool, so his average gold value isn't terrible. Getting into part of what makes Crook strong, it's the selection of enemies in this rightmost slot on day 8. Wandering Shoal is not part of it. Wandering Shoal is good for Poison Vanessa, she has a lot of hits here. At 2700 health, this is relatively easy to kill on day 8 for every build. It's going to very slowly poison you with a pufferfish, so provided you're not completely defensive shield dually, you're going to crush this guy. The average gold value is not that great. He has a bunch of small items, only 2 larger items. He has multiple skills. However, if you have use for Thick Hide, when you slow charge an item 1 second, this skill is insane. If you have use for Improved Toxins, this skill is insane. He has very good skills that can be relevant to very specific builds, and his gold value is not terrible. For day 8, it's fallen off a little bit. This is a lot of small items, not very many large size items. He's not great, unless you're playing a build that benefits from those skills. Having covered Wandering Shoal, I want to talk about these other 3 rightmost enemies very briefly and how they contribute to Crook Pig's dominance, because Crook Pig very frequently gets a big upgrade from these fights. On Burninator Bot, you have a Flamethrower with a shocking 1 in 5 chance to hit it, which is insane when you're giving it plus 200 damage from the Crook. For Robo Bouncer, he has a Katana, which can just be faster than anything you're using and best for triggering yo-yos and other things. Pulse Rifle, very frequently you have a bee or a bird on your board, giving you 3x multicast at 3 seconds, which is insane with the Crook. Cybersecurity and Gatling Gun are both traps, don't worry about those. But the fact that you have 2 relevant hits for your Crook is good here, one being much better than the other, and Dr. Vortex gives you Tesla Coil, which is essentially a medium-sized yo-yo that cannot be frozen, which is very good. So those hits on Crook are actually part of why Crook does so well in the late game, is because you can reliably find something on day 8 to improve your Crook build meaningfully. Now, more generally, all 3 of these enemies offer the most gold and most experience and aren't that tough, so you will almost always be fighting the rightmost enemy on day 8, unless you're specifically going for Joyful Jack at this point to get his crazy skills. Dr. Vortex in particular has an incredibly high average gold value, with only 6 items total counting his skill, 2 large items and a medium item. He gives a lot more gold than you might otherwise expect from an enemy at this point. Neophiliac is potentially very, very good. If you have a build triggering these conditions, getting 5 charged 2 effects is actually a lot of value. I don't really have anything else to say about Dr. Vortex because very rarely do I find myself in a position where I can actually incorporate a Weather Machine or a Lightning Rod into a build. I will say Cog comes up surprisingly often as something I'm considering trying to force onto a board, but he's generally just good because high value plus the option for very, very good Tesla Coil on Crook Pig. Robo Bouncer is generally just picked because he's the most gold, most experience. If you're Crook, then Pulse Rifle is really, really tempting. If you're anything else, I mean, if you're a Vanessa, it's very likely that like you already have a Katana. If Katana's going on your board, your weapons have been scaling over the course of the game, so getting a new weapon here isn't even helpful. There's very little from Robo Bouncer, just like Dr. Vortex. Typically, you're here because it's the rightmost enemy, Joyful Jack didn't show up, and you're just able to beat it relatively easily. This guy's not that threatening. And lastly, Burninator Bot is very much in the same boat, where even a burn build doesn't really care about any of this because the burn build, it's pretty much very specifically just scaling his flamethrower. All of these individual pieces are pretty weak, but the average gold value is very good. He has only 1 small item, a large item, and 3 mediums. They're all gold tier. If you can make this flamethrower work, it is a massive hit, but outside of Crook Pig, it's a lot more work to trigger that. And to recap on day 8, typically the rightmost enemy is not very hard and you can take the bonus gold and bonus XP from doing it. There are some big hits, but not very many. Joyful Jack is always a consideration where you're gonna be like, I could take less rewards for a chance at Rapid Thaw, very specifically Rapid Thaw, which is 1 in 9, unfortunately. So very frequently I find myself on this day taking the rightmost enemy over Joyful Jack. Part of that's just that the Rapid Thaw is new and I wasn't like fully aware it was there yet. But it's just like you have a 1 in 9 chance of getting a really good skill versus the guaranteed value of all the extra money and experience you get from going to the rightmost enemy. And there are virtually 0% of my games where I'm ever fighting Oasis Guardian or Infernal Frigate. Even Cosmic Rock I will usually pick. I'd rather a chance at a feather than like a slight amount of increased gold from these guys on day 8. Gold's getting less and less value as the game goes on because you have more and more of it just from accruing resources and increasing income. Which brings us to day 9. We've already seen the Oasis Guardian, the rest of this is new. Now, unlike the previous day where I virtually never fight Oasis Guardian on day 8, I have fought Oasis Guardian on day 9. Because it is possible that you have something like Death Knight Reaper and Pharaoh's Khan as your middle and right fights, and you literally cannot beat them, and you just have to fight Oasis Guardian. On day 8, I think whatever spawns in the rightmost slot is beatable by almost every build. On day 9, you will sometimes have to fight the leftmost enemy, because Pharaoh's Khan can just kill builds. The sniper rifle is not that scary, it only deals 100 damage, except it deals 5 times that damage because it's his only weapon, so it's only 500 damage, but wait, it's actually triple damage because it's his only weapon, so it's 1500 damage, but it's also his rightmost and leftmost for 50 times 15. That's another, 750 more damage. It's probably fine. He doesn't have a crit. Oh god, he has a crit chance. So Pharaoh's Khan can just one-shot you. If you have shield or high health, you're gonna live. If you have good damage, this thing has a 7-second cooldown. I've played builds where I just kill him before it goes off. Not that hard to do. But there are absolutely builds that just cannot get in before Pharaoh's one-shots them. As for his drops, they're kinda not that good, to be honest. If you yourself are a one-weapon build and having triple damage for half the triggers, or 2/3 the triggers rather, is not a problem, then this can be a really meaningful, massive skill. I've fought this guy to try to get one-shot, one kill before. But outside of that, there's really not a reason to want to fight Pharaoh's Khan at a point in time where, you're looking for items and skills that make your build come together. You're looking for the maximum amount of money possible. Unless you're specifically out for one shot, one kill, Pharaoh's Khan is not going to be it for you. Competing with Pharaoh's Khan in that middle slot is the Elite Duelist. This gets fought by Crookpig all the time. Outside of Crookpig, not a lot going on here. For his skills, we have a big ego, perhaps the most impactful skill in the game, just your weapons have lifesteal. This is part of my conspiracy theory that all drops are not created equal and the chance to get this is much less than 1 in 13. I think it's 1 in 13, might be 1 in 12. We have 9, 10, 11, 12. Okay, 12. This does not feel like 1 in a dozen. I have gotten this once. I have seen one other person on the ladder with this over the course of a lot of games. I feel like I'd see more big ego if this was just a 1 in 12. I don't think it's just a 1 in 12. It's part of my conspiracy theory that drops are weighted, and other people have similar conspiracy theories, but I think we might all just be idiots falling for cognitive bias. However, whatever the chance is, it's not disabled, and big ego is insane. He also has some other skills. You really are not here for these. At day 9, these are irrelevant numbers. It's almost impossible to imagine being happy pulling these over gold. And as for the rest of his stuff, there are builds where Diamond Spices can come in big and do something. The rest of it's wholly irrelevant except for specifically Knife Set on Crookpig. Knife Set's not very good unless you have a way to scale its damage very meaningfully, and Crook is by far the best way to do that. When you see a day 10 Crookpig that has specifically Crook, Itlatl, Yo-Yo, Tesla Coil, Knife, he's just dealing 900 damage every second and killing you instantly. This is part of why Crook is strong, is because every time Crook sees Elite Duelist, which is in half of its games, it's going to come here for the 1 in 6, allegedly, at either Knife Set or Big Ego. And for the last of our fights that are not going to be showing up in the rightmost slot for bonus gold and XP, we have Bloodreef Captain. He's got a golden crow's nest. Doesn't he have a weapon? This is 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I think Bloodreef Captain's missing something here. All the databases are currently being built. They all have some slight inaccuracies. In this case, the Bloodreef Captain is not just the captain of a non-existent boat. He has the boat that has 50x5 lifesteal damage thanks to the crow's nest with 75% crit chance. It's the main thing he does. Pretty much the reason to fight this guy is because you yourself are looking for a golden crow's nest. It's very rare that you're looking to abandon ship and take over his ship and that's your build plan. Frankly, I have never found myself in a situation where I was going for Bloodreef Captain to get the crow's nest. Typically, if you make it this far with a weapons build, you don't need the crow's nest. You already have your crit chance sorted. If you're looking to abandon ship and take over his ship and be a one-weapon build using that, you're probably not strong enough to kill him if you think this is better than what you're doing. So I find Bloodreef Captain's just a character I have no reason to ever fight. The one reason would specifically be if I'm a very strong submarine build or something where I would like to have full arsenal. Actually, full arsenal is also just generally very strong in a combat core dually now. Full arsenal is a pretty good skill with a straight up 1 in 6 of getting it, which is not bad. But typically you're trying to push experience and gold really hard in the late game as a dually, and taking Bloodreef Captain for a 1 in 6 at full arsenal, while it's definitely up there in a consideration, I'm much more often picking a Death Knight Reaper because he has a much more meaningful skills for me to get as dueling, as anyone. Death Knight Reaper has some insane skills. Desperate Freeze has recently been reworked and it's bugged. It's gonna be good when it gets fixed, but right now what it does is when you hit half health, you remove freeze and slow from your items and cleanse half your burn and poison. That's obviously just good. However, it's currently bugged, and once it goes off, you are completely immune to freeze and slow. So it goes from being obviously good to absolutely fucking insane auto win against freeze builds. Much more generally useful is Hypnotic Drain. When you use a weapon, freeze a smaller item for 2 seconds. In virtually every weapon-based build that is not just a pile of small weapons, this is catastrophically powerful. Every time the repeater, the atlatl, the combat core, whatever weapon you're using goes off, which is usually very fast and repeatedly triggerable, or you have a bunch of weapons, you freeze an item. And especially if you're using medium items and lots of them are very quick items, this can just lock down your opponent's small items forever. Hypnotic Drain is insanely powerful. As for the misses, when you don't get Desperate Freeze and Hypnotic Drain, Deadly Eye is hardly relevant at this point in the game, though it's not bad. Sapphire can be relevant if you have freeze builds where stuff on your board benefits from this and you have very flexible slots. I have had runs where Sapphire meaningfully benefited my board, but it's not particularly good. He has, notably, the Scythe for 50 gold and the Mortal Coil to allow you to give yourself lifesteal on something else. It's very rare that Mortal Coil goes into a build and doesn't just get sold, but the average gold value here is very good, with a 3-slot diamond, 2-slot golds, and a 50 gold Scythe, in conjunction with some of the best skills in the game. If I see Death Knight Reaper, I almost immediately stop looking at the rest of it and start asking myself, do I beat Death Knight Reaper? Because he is legitimately scary. A third of your enemy's health with lifesteal is pretty scary, and it means if your build's not good at offense, you might get stalled out by his 4,200 health and massive lifesteal. If your build's bad at defense or your defense is just max health, it can be scary. Typically, you can kill this guy. And I've stopped talking about difficulty so much as the run's gotten longer, because as the run gets longer, it's much harder to predict the power level of a build. But additionally, as the run gets longer, it's much more likely that your build is strong and able to take on these rightmost enemies consistently. As for the rest of the rightmost enemies that aren't Death Knight Reaper, they are nowhere near as good, giving less gold and less experience due to their lower rarity, but also just having worse hits. The Roaming Isle has a pretty massive win though, with Shored Up when you heal shield 100. There are a lot of powerful synergies with that, and just in general, if you trigger that a lot, it's a shitload of shield and can meaningfully impact the outcome of battles, especially if you're fighting someone with burn and you otherwise wouldn't have had shield on your build. The other skills are irrelevant, and unfortunately so are basically all of its drops. With a ton of small items, its average gold value goes off of a cliff, but Shored Up can be massive for your build, and it will be the rightmost enemy with, regardless, the highest gold and experience, even though you kind of expect more. It's just a bunch of small items and not even all gold ones at this point in the game, which for day 9 is pretty rough. Weapons platform has almost nothing anyone wants. There are builds where you'll be happy to get an Uzi or a battery or a cog or a first aid in. There are definitely options for these to be relevant pieces in your build, but you will basically never click this guy targeting these items. Part of that's that he has 8 items on his board plus 2 skills, making it unlikely you find the one you need, but also just that, with the exception of First Aiden, none of these are really unique pieces that couldn't be replicated with something else. As for his skills, distributed systems can be very good when you use a large item, haste 2 small items for 2 seconds. That can also have a lot of synergy where you have something triggering off of the haste, but generally speaking, it's very rare that this is good, and he has so many drops that you can't reliably find it as well. And Keen Eye for crit chance, but again, nothing here works with a crit build, it's just that skill. You don't want to be clicking this guy for it. It's just a ribbon feature when you come here on a crit build because it's the best fight you can take for the most golden experience anyway. And lastly, Enclave Revenant. This deals just enough poison that it can roll you over if you're not a good build. I've had it happen to me. But other than that, it's really not very scary. Like, every time I fight this guy, I expect it to be much worse than it is, and then it gets absolutely destroyed. His skills aren't particularly scary, or useful rather, because, like, while yes, this is a crazy ability for him, as a player, you will not gain regeneration very much. And all of these items, again, while working together well and making for a moderately threatening enemy, they don't really work in conjunction with your board as the player. I can imagine a crazy Soul Ring build, but it sounds like Disneyland and it's not going to happen. However, the average gold value is decent. 2 medium items, not as many small items as what we just saw on the other ones, and more likelihood of hitting these medium items. It's still not good. By far, your best bet is Death Knight Reaper. These other 3 are typically more valuable just because they're going to be getting the bonus experience and gold from being on the right. So the overview for day 9 is basically, unless I'm a crook build going for Elite Duelist, I won't Death Knight Reaper. Otherwise, I'm probably fighting Revenant, Platform, or Roaming Isle just because they're the rightmost enemy, but sometimes my build's so weak and things are going so badly I have to fight Oasis Guardian, but those runs usually are not going to 10 wins. Which brings us to the last and longest day, day 10 plus. I'm going to start off with Sparring Partner. Sparring Partner is not supposed to be beaten, because he has a skill where when you kill him, he cleanses all of his debuffs, doubles his max health, and gives you a gold. So you're supposed to beat him for as much gold as you can before the Sandstorm gets to 600 and forces you out. Typically, though, at this point in the game, I find myself not needing gold that badly. He has no drops that can improve my build, and he gives a 0 experience because you're expecting to lose, and even if you win by surviving Sandstorm, it still gives 0 experience. Sparring Partner is something I will almost never take, unless I am specifically an incredibly high damage exponential scaling pig build where I'm going to expect to gain hundreds of gold from this guy, and then I'm going to convert that gold directly into damage on my items. Outside of that one incredible niche, or just being broke as shit and having a really high damage build, Sparring Partner is not getting picked. Sparring Partner is almost always something I don't click, and I feel like he spawns a lot more often than he should, but the reason for that is because looking at this, Hulking Experiment, Boss Haro, and Master Alchemist are all the left spawns. Trash Titan, Property Baron, and Sparring Partner are all the middle spawns. So there are 3 left, 3 middle, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 rightmost spawns, which makes the game where I fought Lord Arkan 3 times in a row really funny. Now, of all the things that are not the rightmost enemy, typically you pick them because you can't beat the rightmost enemy, which happens a lot more frequently on day 10 than any other day. However, specifically Master Alchemist deserves a huge shout out here. Anyone who's playing a burn build that missed their weather glass, or that found their weather glass and is trying to improve their enablers for it, is going to want a rainbow potion. So this is really good for Burn Vanessa, whether you're looking for the weather glass or looking to improve it. Mortar and Pestle will be a very minor hit for Crook Pig, though you really don't want to be fighting this guy and can usually fight something better on Crook Pig. And when you use a tool reload, 1 to adjacent items can be very valuable, but very rarely actually matters. This is not going to be the way anything gets enabled. It's just like a ribbon feature. You find a slight way to improve your build very late. It's not a reason to click Master Alchemist. At least in my experience, I've never been in a situation where that was something where I could adjust my build and plan around. Boss Haro is just a guy I fight when I somehow can't beat the other 2, or more accurately, when I need XP, I can't be the rightmost and I'm offered Sparring Partner and Property Baron. We'll talk about him in a second. Boss Haro really doesn't have much going for him. His weapons are not going to improve pretty much any late game build, and he only really offers weapons. The one thing he can give you is if you are a mono weapon build, he can give you Assault Focus, which causes any non-weapon item to be slowed for 2 seconds when it is used, which against a lot of builds is catastrophic disruption. There is a very real argument that if you have a great Crook build, you can go to Boss Haro for your 1 in 10 at Assault Focus to absolutely mangle the synergies of a Dooley or a Vanessa that you run up against. And lastly, we have Hulking Experiment amongst our easy options. This guy has some very, very cool stuff available, mostly for port builds. If you're not port, you basically can't reload these, and at this point in the game, a one-off item is not going to contribute much to a build for long because your opponents will have so much health that they will never die to your initial burn if your initial burn is based on things like Bottled Lightning. So while this can contribute to a port build, again, he has a hit for Rainbow Potion, 2 in fact, just like the other guy. It's not as good as the previous man. Parting Shot gives you scaling crit chance, but typically not scaling fast enough to win in a late game in Vanessa, unless you are like a really, really crazy port build that just has no starting crit chance and everything else has been assembled. It's not bad, but I find myself hard-pressed to be in a situation where I can genuinely be happy about Parting Shot. Coming back to the middle options, we have Trash Titan and Property Baron. Trash Titan's just a really weird fight where I'm not sure who wants to go here. He has a bunch of the weird ancillary support poison cards that don't fit into any endgame poison builds and a random Junkyard Lance. His skill, Juggler, is the massive reason to care about him. When you use a small item, charge a large item for 1 second, can be absolutely insane for certain builds. It's not relevant for a lot of them, but for builds where this would send you to the moon, again, you have a 1 in 10 at Juggler coming here. So there is an argument to being like, if I get Juggler, my build goes to the moon and I win. And you go fight Trash Titan instead of whatever you were previously considering that you could beat on the rightmost fight. And lastly, Property Baron. On days 10 and 11, this guy's notably scarier because your health is scaling up as you play the game. On days 10 and 11, this Skyscraper, whose damage is not really visible here, it hits for about 1100 times 2. and it has a crit chance of 25 from the billboard, meaning that he can hit you for 4,000 after 6 seconds. A lot of builds, that's just a chance to die instantly to Property Baron, and you can't fight this guy, at least early on. By day 13, pretty much every build will live through Skyscraper and kill him before the second Skyscraper hit, but a lot of builds, even strong builds, might not be able to kill Property Baron on day 10. There's also virtually no one that wants to fight this guy right now because Property Pig just isn't really a thing. And thank God for that, because Balcony's still bugged and giving 5 to 15 times additional value. So I'm really glad no one's playing Skyscraper builds. But if you were, you'd also be happy to hit Master Salesman. If Property Pig were a thing, this guy has a 2 out of 5 to give you core pieces of your build that are incredibly valuable, and a 3 out of 5 to give you either a minor amount of gold or a huge amount of gold. When the minimal value this guy can give you on Property Pig is 8 gold, that is an incredible fight. So Property Baron is very good specifically for Property Pig, who is not played right now, and very dangerous for everyone. He also has a pretty high average amount of gold, again, only 5 items, including Diamond Large and 2 Gold Larges. Which brings us to the home stretch, the last 8 enemies that are rotating in the rightmost slot as you go through your final days. Void Golem is an enemy that a lot of people straight up can't kill, because at the start of the fight, you both lose an item, and that's just a % chance for your build to brick and be able to kill him. He's also the best way of finding caltrops in the late game for Pig, so a lot of Pigs are actually in a spot where they're like, if he hits X, I lose the fight, but then if I win, I have a 1 in 4 chance at caltrops. So a lot of Pigs actually find themselves interested in finding Void Golem, even though they won't reliably beat it, because it can give them the caltrops. Singularity is a very cool item, but at 15 seconds, it's very regularly the case that you just can't expect Singularity to go off in time to impact a fight. And that's really all I had to say about Void Golem. The simple fact is that he's not that scary of a fight. It's just if you're vulnerable to Into the Void, you can't fight him, and if you can beat him outside of that, then he's absolutely got great value. Because sure, all right, less value than normal, because a lot of the time you'll see Into the Void as your skill, and you just can't even click on it. It makes your build worse. But he has 2 diamond mediums, 2 gold mediums, and a 50 gold legendary, as well as an 8 gold spice. So like his gold value is pretty high. It's just a lot of the time you can't fight him. And as Pig, a lot of the time you're like, I might lose, but you know, caltrops gives me an endgame build and I don't have one right now, so I've got to take the chance on Pig. Come over to Void Colossus. This is the big brother of Void Golem, but because his thing takes a while to go off, it takes a long time, but it gets charged by the adjacent items. The reality is that very frequently it takes about 10 to 15 seconds for this to go off, depending on your disruption, and you just kill the guy before he does anything. However, his gold value is not incredible. He has a bunch of medium items, 1 large item. Its average gold is pretty good, but that is a 2 out of 7 of hitting a skill, and the skills this guy has are not entirely irrelevant, but usually pretty irrelevant. You pretty much need to be a burn build, and even then, Void Energy is not particularly important. Void Rage is a pretty minor thing, like it's going to give you a lot of haste, but at this point in the game, getting haste once you start going off, it's not bad, but there's so many builds that already have permanent haste at the point in time where you're getting Void Rage is how I feel about it. Void Colossus, however, is a fight that I very frequently pick just because it is a rightmost fight with huge increases in golden experience over the middle and left fights where I can beat the guy, and that's all that really matters. Veteran Octopus doesn't deserve to have his items talked about because it's all the same item. If you think Octopus is good in your Crook build, you're being tricked. Octopus is a trap, don't fall for it. As for the rest of his items, Standard Ordnance is actually really good in a Crook build, massively increasing your damage on the items you actually should put on your board. Hyper Focus could be very good if you only have 1 medium item, but that's very rarely the case. And Arms Race is just like an amount of crit chance. You come here because he's the rightmost enemy with good average gold value and Parkus of Octopus. You're never coming here targeting Hyper Focus because the odds of getting it are so low to the Cutlass. You're just here because Octopus can be beaten. And that is also true of all of these guys, actually. Awakened District will sometimes wreck your build because you just don't deal with them before Soul of the District goes off. But typically speaking, Awakened District is just not that hard to kill. And he has very high gold value from all of his items. His skills are not super impactful. Trickle-down economics can be helpful for a lot of builds. It can be irrelevant for a lot as well. Plus 20 shield at this point in the game is just not a huge deal. And Prosperity is generally much, much better than plus 20 shield. Lord Arkan is basically just a trap. I've had an alarming number of Crook builds where I got the Eclipse and it was just the best thing I could do because I never found a yo-yo. But other than that, all of his items are not very good. These Gatling guns are just a trick. Do not put them on your Crook board. I have run Gatling gun Crooks so many times. It's never better than a flail. Don't do it. And for his skills, the huge thing here is Unwavering. Whenever you use an item, Shield 40 is just tremendous value. That's a huge amount of shield on most builds. There are a handful of shields with meaningful synergy, especially you, Harmadillo, where that's just incredible value. The heavy and standard ordnance, not huge deals, not really. And Lord of the Waste is, again, pretty good gold value. He has a legendary item. He doesn't have that many small items. He has nothing beneath gold. Foreboding Winds is actually very, very good on a lot of builds. It's also unpickable on a lot of builds. If you are the aggressor, if you have bad scaling, Foreboding Winds is good, because getting that crit chance allows you to more likely get under your opponent's build. This is something I take automatically in Crook builds, for instance. However, if you are the defensive build, if you need to survive, then this is very frequently going to make you more likely to die before you scale up, because it is a symmetrical effect that affects both players. And heavy weaponry is pretty minor. At the point in the game where you're on day 10, your large weapon dealing 72 more damage is very rarely going to meaningfully impact anything. The biggest drop is definitely Genie Lamp. Genie Lamp will very frequently give you an extra death, where using the lamp lets you increase your prestige to a point where dying doesn't cause the cheat death to take effect anymore. And in the worst case, it's still worth 38 gold or 8 gold and 15% max health. Genie Lamp's just incredible. And again, he's just not a very threatening fight, so it's great to fight him when you get the chance. Which brings us to our last two options, Frost Street Champion, who is always a pain to fight, but if you are a freeze build, your chance at Diamond Snowflake is pretty meaningful. If you are a port build, Frost Potion is huge, and the rest of these do still sell for relevant gold. Sapphire is only 8, unfortunately, but then we have medium gold, medium diamond, and large diamond for tons of money. If you are a freeze build yourself, Invigorating Cold is absolutely massive, hastening your whole board on the first freeze. And if you are a weapons only build, Blizzard is insane, freezing only your opponent's cards for the first 2 seconds because you have no non-weapon items. I've also had a lot of builds that had a lot of non-weapon items, but also some weapon items. And the weapon items were how I started scaling my defenses for whatever reason. So Blizzard can, even on builds that have very few weapons, still be putting you in a spot where you're like, I'm really weak to poison specifically, right? I don't mind using Blizzard because it hurts a poison build more than it hurts me. While my cards are frozen, the clamor will be ticking down. I'm not afraid of weapon builds at all. It's very possible for a Blizzard to be insane, even in defensive decks that have relatively few weapons, but it's at its best by far in some sort of beatdown deck. It doesn't really matter what the build is. If you're beatdown, you like Blizzard. And lastly, we have Vulcus Enforcer. You very rarely want to fight this guy. He's just your rightmost enemy, and the other guys don't have things you care about. I will mention Icebreaker is, as is so often the case, a big hit for Crook Pig. It is a medium item that effectively makes you immune to freeze, which is, countering one of the ways to stop a Crook Pig. The rest of this, not really relevant. Again, Frost Potion can be good for a port build, but a port build has likely already gotten a better Frost Potion than Silver at this point in time. If it has it, you're happy to see it. But none of this is particularly relevant outside of Icebreaker and Frost Potion. The Diamond Icicle can find itself on a board. It's not something you're usually happy about, but it isn't bad at all. And these skills, in my experience, have been wholly irrelevant to everything. If you're freezing enough to benefit from reaching the summit, then you probably already won. And freeze builds typically give up shielding in exchange for freezing. I don't tend to see those showing up too much on the same build. Which, at long last, an hour and 40 minutes into Raw recording, we have covered every enemy in the game. And I could wrap it up here, but a quick recap of the days and how I feel about them. I wonder what's going on. It feels like it's getting more laggy. I'm going to open a new tab. Okay, yeah, it feels like having been open for a while, it got less responsive, and that weird thing with the graphics not changing on time was happening. This is just slowly becoming a bug report for how Bazaar.gg, but whatever. But like I was saying, before I wrap up, I want to quickly go over the days and how I feel about them as a whole. Now that I've talked about all the enemies, I meant to do it during the video. I kind of was. I did it well for some, poorly for others, completely forgot on some. So let's quickly go through all the days. Day 1, what are you trying to fight? Generally speaking, Fanged Inglet I'm happy to fight. I'll take Viper if I can and really benefit from a Poison Fang, but other than that, I'm either going Fanged Inglet, or I specifically am a dually looking for a duct tape, a burn build looking for a lighter, or a shield build that doesn't care what kimono gives me, I'll take it. I very rarely find myself doing anything other than those options. I used to fight Kyber Drone a lot, but once I realized that Fanged Inglet just had a higher average gold value, I've basically stopped fighting Kyber Drone. Coming into day 2, you never, ever fight Warrior. If you think you should fight Warrior, stop, slap yourself in the face, and have a real think about what you were just about to do. Rogue Scrapper, on the other hand, great fight. If you can take him, but he's pretty hard for day 2. Covetous Thief is also pretty hard for day 2, but he has very, very good rewards, even though he's not the rightmost enemy. He has effectively +2 income with his skill. He has the gold-stealing dagger. He has the safe. Tent City Mare is fine if you don't get Covetous Thief. It's going to be the highest gold option you get. If you can't beat middle or right, then you're left with Mosquito and Crab. Crab has some cool builds open to it, Mosquito gives you CDR, but realistically, once you're fighting one of those, unless you're specifically going for a weird Crab build, you're usually just fighting the one you can beat and not really making a decision about what's best for you. Coming to day 3, Scout Trooper and Aetheryte are very scary. If your build's doing well, you can typically take them. If you're not, you're going to have to settle for something else. In that regard, you're probably just taking one of the middle fights. I'm almost never taking Dabbling Apprentice or Flame Dancer. Brawl Street Challenger for weights is something I will consider specifically on Pig, depending on how my build is shaping up, over the rightmost fights to get weights. But other than that, I'm just taking the rightmost fight that I can reliably beat. And Aetheryte and Scout Trooper are, in my opinion, the thing where as a player, when you're learning, these are the fights that you learn to evaluate the most, because they're the ones that are the closest to failure points, where knowing if you can beat Scout Trooper and Aetheryte will very meaningfully affect how your game turns out. Coming to day 4, we have Boiler Room Brawler Day. You have a 50% chance of seeing this man, and what is it, a 1 in 7 at Hammer? 1 in 7 items, 1 in 9 at Hammer, 1 in 9 at Wrench, and a bunch of garbage. So in 1 out of 18 runs, the Brawler is going to give you a Hammer, and 8 out of 18 runs, the Brawler is going to waste your time, and in 9 out of 18 runs, we make a decision about fighting somebody else. We don't ever want to fight the Dervish, the Retiree, or the Blood Reef Raider. Exception goes to Raider if he is specifically fighting a Vanessa that hasn't found a Crow's Nest, or Flame Juggler. So we're trying to fight the rightmost build, but both Technovirus and Hydro Dude are terrifying. So if we don't get Brawler or Crooner, then we're going to figure out what the best fight is of this lot. But usually we're fighting either Brawler or Crooner on this day, and Brawler is the one I want to fight. If I'm really strong, I can probably take Hydro Dude and I might be able to take Technovirus, but usually this is Brawler Day. Coming to day 5, this is Gorgon Day. Whether it's Mod Squad or Gorgon, day 5 is the day where I go into it expecting to fight the right enemy. I am always going to take the rightmost enemy unless my build is just in the dumpster. Gorgon and Mod Squad are not very tough, and they have incredible rewards. Conversely, while Curvian Rocket Trooper has a great item specifically for Crit Vanessa, and Infernal Envoy can give you a lot of burn synergy, outside of those specific builds, the rest of this doesn't really have an appeal. Well, Printing Duelist once again for the Crit Vanessa build. But you really, really want the gold and experience in the rightmost things, as well as the fact that gold on Mod Squad's far, far, far above what you expect normally at this point in the game, and Gorgon Noble has some insane skills that she can give you. Going to day 6, oh man, day 6 is typically where you get slapped by Lich. It's where you're like, I can fight Lich, right? And you're coping out your mind and you just wasted your encounter, and losing an encounter is one of the worst things you can do in this game. It is a tremendous setback, but if you can fight Lich, you fight Lich every time. That doesn't happen most of the time. There are 4 encounters here, and Lich is by far one of the hardest encounters for its day in the game. It is up there with Borger and the S tier for most terrifying enemies. Infernal is also very scary, though its rewards are much lower than fighting a Lich. Typically on this day, I'm looking at fighting a Zookeeper if Crook is in any way beneficial to my build, or fighting the rightmost enemy if I can. Once those things aren't happening, I'm really just trying to decide what's the most beneficial for my deck. Coming to day 7, this is a day where we very much are picking fights based on skills most of the time. We have Bonk on Thug, we have Rapid Thul on Joyful Jack, and we have Fire Rebirth on Radiant Corsair. If you have the Corsair, you try to get it. If you have the Thug, you try to get it. If you have both available to you, I typically go for the Corsair. I can see myself being wrong about that. And if none of these skills are on the table, then you're probably fighting Chili Charles or Treasure Turtle. If you have a board where you have specifically one of these two, Cosmic Rock and Shock Trooper, then you're either fighting Cosmic Rock or Shock Trooper, depending on whether or not you value the CDR and whether or not you think you can take the Shock Trooper. Coming to day 8, this is once again a day where I am almost always fighting the toughest enemy for max gold, max XP. There is an argument to fight Joyful Jack if you really care about Rapid Thaw. There's an argument to fight Cosmic Rock if you really care about CDR. But typically, I really care about gold and experience, so I'm fighting one of Vortex, Robo Bouncer, Shoal, or Bot every time. These enemies are just not that tough for this point in the game, and there are not that many terrible results from fighting them. They don't have big things that push me towards them, like a Lich or a Gorgon or a Joyful Jack, but just the gold and experience is very valuable. If I'm in a build where I'm expecting to go really late, where I've lost several games, but I'm winning on day 15, Joyful Jack is something I'm much more interested in picking, because Rapid Thul is much more likely to be relevant when I'm looking at day 15 dually builds. Coming to day 9, we have Death Knight Reaper. This is the guy I want to fight. I tend to play builds where Hypnotic Drain is a game-winning card, and if I'm playing Crook Pig, then Elite Duelist is something I have to actually weigh against it, because both are massive hits. Outside of those, though, single item builds really like Pharaoh's Khan, And that's pretty much it. Other than that, the decision making is just what is the rightmost enemy that I can kill on this day. And lastly, we have day 10 plus, by far the biggest collection of enemies. If I am playing like a Port Vanessa or a Weatherglass Vanessa, there's a lot of decision making about Hulking Experiment and Master Alchemist that goes into this. But if I am playing anything else, the decision making process is usually what is the rightmost enemy, can I kill it? Because on most builds, there are no relevant hits outside of the rightmost enemy. Boss Haro can be relevant, Hulking Experiment and Master Alchemist, as I just said. Property Baron for Pig, Trash Titan's not really for anyone, Sparring Partner has no drops unless you're specifically looking to gold scale somehow. Typically speaking, in the late game, all of the big hits are on the rightmost enemy, so the decision-making process is, can I beat the rightmost enemy, unless you are very specific builds that have very specific things you want from everyone else. And for most of the enemies, the answer is pretty consistently, dude, it's day 10 and I'm basically a god, of course I can take them. And it looks like over the course of recording this video, Tempo Storm has figured out what the problem was and gotten their infrastructure update out to fix their servers, so that's good news. But for now, I'm done. I hope this was helpful to somebody. I hope hearing my opinions on the monsters was insightful in any way, or that creating a record of what all the monsters look like at this point in the game was helpful or interesting down the line in the future. For now, I'm done. I've been Rather Incoherent. Thank you for your time. Thank you for watching. If you made it this far, then please do consider liking, commenting, and subscribing. All that stuff really does help the channel grow, and I really do appreciate it. Before I go, I cannot overstate my gratitude towards the fine folks on Patreon as patrons and here on YouTube as channel members who support me as I continue this whole YouTube thing. I'll see you all in the next one.